I'm going to go ahead and begin the recording for the class. Thought I would start with the headlines from today's news. Some of the headlines from today's news. Looks like we got a pretty short group of students in here right now, including myself. Oh, okay, there we go. A couple more coming in. Good. I read this morning that Hurricane Laura has hit the coast of Louisiana, and they're bracing for the storm surge, and rescue crews are going in even before the hurricane is done. So don't know how many people have gotten trapped in Louisiana because of the storm, but things are pretty bad. Hopefully you don't have family down there. Hopefully the family you do have down there were able to escape. It was a really sad night for sports fans last night as the NBA, MLS, and Major League Baseball, MLB, decided to cancel their games in solidarity with the protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And after a peaceful night of protest last night, the vice president said at the RNC that it was violent. Well, the only violence that we can recall would be the violence of the 17-year-old shooter from Illinois who traveled to Kenosha to kill two people and almost kill a third. So that's still on our minds. The Kenosha thing, NBA is out on strike because of the Kenosha, Wisconsin thing. The RNC is into their third night last night. Tonight is the fourth night of the convention. And I think 45 speaks tonight to accept the nomination of the Republican Party. Last night, the vice president spoke to accept the nomination of the party. What else is going on? What did I miss? What did I miss? What did I miss? There's a lot more going on. Let's just leave it right there. There's a bunch of stuff that's really bad out there. So today, what I thought I would cover would just be the communication model, the model for effective communication, and then the levels of communication. And after that, if there's time today, we'll talk about the first assignment that I'd like for you to do. And it really is just a voiceover. I'd like for you to read 60 seconds of a book. So find a good section of any good book and read it. And I want you to voice it. And if you're not familiar with how to voice literature, you may want to log on to Audible and get a sample there or some other audio book program, because it's not just reading the words, you have to actually read them with emotion. So good luck with that. We'll talk about that at the end. All right, levels of communication. Did we mention the 7 levels of communication last time? This should be familiar to a lot of you. And you can just jump in if you'd like to help out with this discussion and make it more of a discussion versus a Zoom lecture. I am recording this for anybody who was unable to make it, or if your connection happens to be faulty, you can come back and get the recording later on. First level of communication that I want to talk about. Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is communication with the self. How many of us are bilingual or multilingual? Ms. Francois, feel free to type something right in the chat box.
Oh no, I was raising my hand to answer yes to the question.
Oh, okay. What other languages do we speak? What other cultures do we speak?
Who, me?
Anyone and everyone. A little French, a little Spanish. I know a couple of phrases in Igbo. A couple people speak French. Okay, so those of you who speak French, I'm really curious. Do you speak France French or Canadian French? Okay. And how many of us have a dual primary language? So let's say you were raised in a Salvadoran house. In your house, you always spoke Salvadoran Spanish, but of course, in schools, you spoke English. So you actually were raised bilingual or bicultural language. I'm like Ricky. I speak English primarily, so I am pretty much American. Okay, so more than one language in the house. That's fantastic because, from what I understand from the language professors, is if you are born into a language, then that language becomes your way of thinking. And the rest of us, we learn a language in school, and that language becomes a translation. And what I want to talk about is the translation. As you're developing this new language and you're learning how to say something and then how to say something the proper way, how to move your jaw and how to open your throat for certain sounds, as you're learning these things, you process in your mind how to say something so that number one, it's not offensive, and number two, so that you can be understood. So I use this Igbo phrase um, periodically for a class discussion. And in this Igbo phrase, those people who speak Igbo from Igbo land, from Nigeria, they always giggle because of my pronunciation. And the funny thing with Igbo is a phrase can mean one thing with one tone and something very different with another tone. Same words, but if the tone changes, the meaning changes. The same thing happens with Chinese Mandarin. So with English, the words are the words, but in a more high context culture, there's much more going on than just the words. But we have to think about these things. Give me 1 second. All righty. Okay. When you want to share something, feel free to unmute your mic and share it. You should have that ability to do that. If you don't, raise your hand or type in the chat box and let me know that I need to unmute you. Okay, so when we're speaking a foreign language, we need to try to speak that language or in that culture. And as we're speaking in that culture, we have to do a conversion in our head unless it's our native language. So here's what we end up doing. I visited my son when he was doing a study abroad semester in southern France. So he spoke French, but he wasn't living in Paris where you can always find somebody speaking English. He was in southern France in Aix-en-Provence. And when I went to visit him, I didn't speak hardly any French. I understood a little bit more than I could share, but I just could not figure out how to position my mouth, tongue, throat in a way to be understood by Southern French. And Southern French sounds slightly different from Parisian French, which is slightly different from Eastern French. And we all get that. Same thing with the American dialect. If you have a Southern accent, everybody knows what a Southern accent is because it sounds slightly different from a Northern or a Midwestern accent. So as we're converting these words, we are communicating with ourselves. How exactly do I say, please direct me to the train station? And how do I say that in that culture? That is intrapersonal communication. And because of the way communication works, it should be a fairly clear message because I'm communicating with me. Does that make sense to everyone? One communication connection and one sender receiver. If we decide to add another sender receiver, we move on from intrapersonal communication to dyadic communication. With dyadic communication, we have a different sender than receiver. So I just sent a personal message to Mr. Rameau. Or is it Monsieur Rameau? Anyway, I sent a personal message to Mr. Rameau. I didn't actually do this, but if I did, then it would have been me as the receiver and Mr. Rameau as me as the sender and Mr. Rameau as the receiver. So we have a sender, a message, a receiver, and then we have a feedback message. And that completes the cycle for the communication. Now, there's much more going on than that, but let's just keep it as simple as possible until I get a whiteboard in here. Sender, message, receiver, feedback message. If I say, good morning, Mr. Rameau, how you doing? If he doesn't respond, his non-response is the response. And it's still punctuated, that transaction is still punctuated. The problem is Mr. Rameau has a slightly different culture than I have. So we have these two cultures that are trying to figure out how to communicate effectively. And that's what makes dyadic communication a little more difficult than intrapersonal communication. We think about how hard messages are. If I can just have 5 of you do me a quick favor, I'm going to share a message. And what I want you to do is type in the chat box what you believe the message means. Don't read other people's understanding of it. You just type in your understanding of my message.
You said that again.
Yeah. I'm going to share a message and just type in the chat box what you believe my message means.
Okay.
Teaching is the epitome of learning. Teaching is the epitome of learning. So just type in the chat box what that means. Teaching is the epitome of learning. I just realized that some of you may be on your phones and you may not be able to easily type in the chat box. If you're not able to type in the chat box, unmute yourself and just go ahead and share what it means. Okay, you're learning while you teach. Anybody have anything different from that? You never stop learning. They go together. Okay. So how is it that we have different understandings of a very simple message? Teaching is the epitome of learning. And maybe what I meant, and this is unfair because I didn't write it down first, maybe what I meant was that there are levels to learning, and the highest level of learning is the actual teaching. Once again, it's unfair for me to say that because I'm saying it after everybody said something different. So if we share any other message, same thing will happen. We'll have a slightly different understanding of that message, and it's because we're individuals, and our individuals have cultures, and our experiences and our grasp of language and who we are helps to determine how we interpret any message. And because we're different, that makes the message that much less clear. Somebody could tell you no, but do they always mean no as a negative? Or sometimes does no mean a positive? Or is sometimes a no a maybe? Or does sometimes no mean go ask your other parent? Even with a message as simple as no, there could be confusion. So we've got intrapersonal communication, which could be fairly clear, not necessarily always clear. Even when you communicate with yourself, you don't understand you. And then we have dyadic communication, which is tough because we have to take into consideration people's culture. Ooh, what if you're talking to someone whose first language is not English? And that's just verbal language. There's also nonverbal language. And then if we add a third person to the process, we have small group communication. Currently, we are engaged in small group communication in this classroom environment because we're all communicating with each other. And you might find this hard to believe, but I am familiar with some of the people who are in this classroom environment right now. We've had classes together. And because we've had classes together, we have a relationship that is maybe older than the relationship that the rest of us have because we have not had classes together. And others of you have had classes with each other, and you have a relationship. And that kind of relationship does change the way that we communicate. In some ways, it makes that communication that much easier because you know where that person is coming from. You've had experiences together, so you can share your body of knowledge. So with small group communication, two people communicating, it could be fairly simple, but when we add a third person, we have to pay attention to more communication connections. So you have your sender, your receiver, and the observer. So the observer and the receiver have a relationship. The observer and the sender have a relationship. The sender and the receiver have a relationship. So you've got three communication connections that you have to pay attention to when you're sending a message. And in some ways, we have to water that message down so that everyone gets it. The more people we add, the more communication connections, the simpler the message has to be. Some of us have been in situations where people revert to speaking a language that is not my native language, and they sort of take me out of the conversation. And I just think that is so rude. If we're all in the same room together, we're all communicating. Why aren't we all communicating? Especially if you're on your cell phone and you're talking to someone who speaks your native language, and you first say hello in English and then you go into some other language. What about me? I cannot eavesdrop if you're speaking a language I don't understand. And we are communicating. What you're saying to me is this is not about you. You are excluded from this conversation. In that small group communication, we're sending the message to the person on the other end of the phone and the person who's listening to the conversation. And it says, you're included, you're not included. Just by how we speak to someone on the phone. Does all of that make sense?
Yeah.
So for small group communication, the numbers for the purposes of our class are 3 to 29. The average person can manage up to 29 different interactions within an interaction. The average person. Some of you are much better than others at this, so you might be able to manage 33 or 35. And others are less good at this and may be only able to manage 20 for small group communication, because with small group, you're paying attention to every single communication connection in the transaction. We have large group communication, and that's when we have 30 or more, 30 to 99 within a confined space, and we're attempting to manage those communication connections. It's just not possible for the average person. And because of that, we change the way we communicate. And this is where we begin to use stereotyping and grouping. With a large group, we break the groups down by whatever mechanism makes the most sense to us as the sender. If we're in a large auditorium or a small auditorium, fewer than 99 people, it's possible for some people to pay attention to most of those communication connections, but not all of them. And as we're paying attention to those communication connections, we will break the group into smaller segments. We'll say the people in the left back is one group of people. The people in the front right is another group of people. The people in the middle is another group of people. The young people is another group of people. So I'm communicating with the groups rather than the individuals within the groups. And again, that makes communication just a little less clear. So we have intrapersonal communication, dyadic communication, small group communication, large group communication. So if we have 100 or more within a confined space, this is public communication. Please silence, put your microphone on mute, please. So public speaking is 100 or more within a confined space. This actually becomes a little bit easier for most speakers, for most senders, because when we have this confined space and we cannot figure out ways to group people together, then we group them as one. So it's me, the speaker, and my audience. I may have components of my audience, but it's me, the speaker, and my audience. So we have just the one communication connection. And that makes things a lot easier. Until one member of that audience stands aside or makes herself stand aside from the rest of the audience, and then we're engaged in small group communication again. So those are the 5 levels of communication. The other 2 that we're going to talk about are very different from those 5, but still are considered levels of communication. The first one is organizational communication. Organizational communication changes the way we look at things from the sender-receiver to the message itself. Everyone knows that we have a new president for Prince George's Community College. Is that correct?
Yes.
Dr. Felicia Williams. And Dr. Williams is one of the people who decided that our classes were going to be online. Has anybody seen what's going on at North Carolina and South Carolina, Alabama, Notre Dame, where they decided to have classes on campus and they all said, okay, we tried it, didn't work, everybody go back home? Well, our president thought about this, and Towson did the same thing. Thank you. Our president thought about this and decided that we would do things right the first time. She said, let's not have classes on campus right now. Let's figure out how best to deal with this thing, and then we'll figure out how to bring students back to campus in a better way. The other thing she decided was that every single faculty member who was going to be teaching this semester would be certified to teach online. So you wouldn't have somebody who doesn't know what he or she is doing teaching your online class. Those of you who were with us in the spring semester when we first started this process and they sent everybody home, the reason that our spring break was 2 weeks rather than 1 was because many of the faculty had to go through training just to finish the semester. And over the summer, there was more training in order to do what it is we attempted to do. Some of us had already been trained. and had been teaching online. So we didn't have to have all of the training, but everybody had to be certified. Hopefully, all of your professors are able to teach in a way that keeps your attention throughout the class and provides something that is educational and beneficial to you. So when Dr. Williams decided to do this, she sat with herself and said, I don't want to make mistakes. I'm just guessing. I don't know what she did. I don't want to make mistakes. I want to benefit all the students. We want to make sure that our college is a safe place for students, not just now, but in the future as well. So she thought about these things, and then she decided to call the college her chief of staff. Called the chief of staff and said, okay, this is what I want to do. How do we make this happen? So she went from intrapersonal communication, communicating with herself, to communicating with Alonia Sharps, the chief of staff. So then she had dyadic communication. Same message. We're closing down the campus. We're doing everything online. We're going to really dig into Blackboard Collaborate. The first step was intrapersonal. The second step was dyadic. And then Alonia Sharp says, if we're going to do this, we got to bring in the senior team. So let's have a Zoom conversation with me, you, the vice president of finance, the vice president of student affairs, the vice president of academics, the vice president of technology, and then we can decide how best to move forward. So then they had small group communication. And once they came up with the right message for the campus, each of those vice presidents talked to their entire group. So then they had large group communication. And then after that, as the semester begins, the president talks to the entire student body, or not student body, but of the faculty and staff at the college. So then we have electronic public communication. So she went through all 5 levels of communication with a singular message. That becomes organizational communication. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. And we're going to move on to the last one, and that's mass mediated. Does anyone have a social media account with more than 1,000 connections? Either 1,000 friends on Facebook, if you're over 60. Several people. Of course you do. Do you know all of those connections? Do you personally know them? Or are they just online connections? Of course not. We've already decided you can only manage so many personal connections. And when I say know them, I mean how know them on a deeper level. And a deeper level might be knowing their birth date, or knowing their wedding anniversary, or knowing their nickname, whatever it is. So when you communicate on social media, you're communicating with people who you kind of know but don't really know. Facebook tells you their birthday, but do you know their birthday? Do you know it before it happens, or do you just find out because Facebook sends you that notification? Let's say that, well, I'll tell you the story about the tree in my backyard. When we had the last storm come through, it was a hurricane that hit the eastern coast and did a lot of damage in North Carolina, but then it came inland. Well, I live on the eastern shore of Maryland, so we got the tropical storm part of the hurricane that came through. And when it came through, we had wind gusts of up to 45 miles an hour. As a comparison, when Hurricane Laura hit Louisiana, the wind gusts were over 130 miles an hour. So the 45 miles an hour wind gust that we got knocked one of the trees down in my neighbor's yard. And that tree fell all the way across my whole backyard. So of course we're trying to figure out what to do. Is he responsible for the tree? Am I responsible for the tree? Because it was his tree, but it's my yard. His insurance is not going to pay for the tree in my yard. It only pays for the tree part in his yard. So he had somebody come clean up his tree, and then they gave me a quote. They wanted $1,800 to clean up the tree in my yard that came down because of the hurricane. And I said, there is no way I'm paying that kind of money. Well, first of all, I ain't got it. And secondly, 18, that's a lot of money. I just go out and buy a chainsaw. So I went out and bought a chainsaw and I started cutting off branches of the tree. Start with the smaller branches till I get to the bigger part and then figure out how to do that. So I was cutting off one of the big branches and my chainsaw got stuck because I don't do this all the time. So I called my son and said, hey, the chainsaw is stuck. Help me get this out. So we went and got the axe, got the other chainsaw, started cutting the tree. And then I said, I need for you to hold that chainsaw so when I loose it, it doesn't fall and break. He said, cool, got you. So he grabbed the chainsaw and I made that one last cut. So the branch came down, chainsaw came loose. He was good, but as I'm cutting, I'm actually standing on branches and not solid ground. And when that big branch fell, and the branch is bigger than me, it fell one way and then fell back the other way. And back the other way is exactly where I was. So I got knocked down by the tree branch that I had just cut off. And I was so happy. Well, first, I didn't get injured that much. I just got scratches all over me. But I was so happy that his phone was out of reach, so he couldn't videotape this whole thing happening and put it on social media. Because he would have had people laughing at me, and it's people I don't even know. There is no evidence that I was ever knocked down by a tree branch. If he decided to share this scene of a dude cutting a tree and getting knocked down by his tree, other people might see it, but the way that social media works is we find stuff that we find funny or interesting, and the first thing we do is we share it. So we share with other people, and those other people are not necessarily our friends. So when you put something on social media, you have no idea who is reading that message or getting that message that you just posted. And that's what makes mass mediated communication. There is no feedback. Remember, we had the sender, receiver, and the message. And the message goes from the sender to the receiver, then there's a feedback message. With mass media, you have a sender, a message, and you're not sure who the receiver is. And you rarely get a feedback message in real time. I got my feedback message because some people LOL, some people actually laughed, other people laughed really hard at my little story here. But in mass media, you could take this recording and share it with somebody else. And those people might laugh, but I wouldn't know it because that's mass comm, that's mass mediated communication. And those are the 7 levels of communication. We're going to spend most of our time focused on the 7th level, mass mediated communication. So we think about how we communicate to the masses without knowing what the feedback might be, hoping that we get the right kind of feedback. So real quick, can we talk about Tory Lanez?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a partner, and once in a while, my partner and I have gotten into a verbal altercation. I have never thought that the way to resolve this altercation would be to pull out a gun and start shooting at my partner's feet. So what's going on with dude that was his thought if the story is true? Because we got conflicting stories. Okay. It's just emotional immaturity and not some level of insanity. I mean, how do you go back to your friends and say, well, she got on my nerves, so I shot her? You ain't hard. Wait. Meg isn't a snitch. When was Meg a snitch?
I think he was saying snitch because people are accusing her of telling, I guess, snitching on Tory Lanez because she told everyone what happened. I guess she got on Instagram Live and told her story, and people are consider that being a snitch, but I don't know what that really means. Someone shot me in the foot. I'm pretty sure people are gonna want to know what happened.
Yeah, but didn't they sort of cancel Takashi because he told?
But that's different. That like
Yeah, it
it's
is.
a level of snitching. Like he snitched because he was trying to get a deal. Like he was going to jail, so he ratted other people out to save himself. She already got shot. She didn't save herself. She wasn't at fault.
Yeah, Mr. Tyson.
Yeah, she spoke a very valid point because like Megan, she's more of a civilian in this situation. She's not in no, any type of mafia gang, nothing like that. Which Tekashi 6ix9ine was associated with gang members. So it's kind of different when you snitching on people that you associate with. And Megan is just more of a civilian getting shot. You know what I'm saying? So civilian snitching shouldn't be really saying like, oh, they're snitches because they're civilians trying to take care of themselves. When there's like a guy like Takashi associating with people that's supposed to be, like in a gang, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it. I'm not sure that I understand the nuances of the different situations. She was hanging out with somebody who had a gun. So basically, she's hanging out with a gangster.
I wouldn't call him a gangster.
You ain't say no gangster.
All right. Part of the reason that millions of people saw the video that Megan Thee Stallion posted was because that story is interesting. And what it does is it gives us this shared body of knowledge. So now we all know the story. We just had a conversation about something that happened in the intimate parts of someone else's life. If we assume that Megan was just a regular woman and Tory Lanez was just like a regular dude, people have issues and people have conflict, and we don't really know about it until they become the story themselves because they are who they are. You become the story yourself because you have 1,000 followers asking for your story. So when you post your story, you are the celebrity. You are the story. And for those 1,000 people and the 1,000 people they share the message with, you become that shared body of knowledge. That is mass mediated communication in very much the same way as if, what's that woman's name who wrote that book? Hold on. Oh, I can't find it right now. But let me just say, if you're Ta-Nehisi Coates and you write a book, you don't know who reads the book. And right now, he has no clue how many people read the book because his book, Between the World and Me, is out on free PDF. So you can download the book, I can download the book and give it to you. So there is no feedback message, and that's what makes it difficult. And it makes the message the shared body of knowledge for anyone who consumes it. Alrighty now. I'm going to need for everyone to actually get a book. You probably have a library at your house, and I want you to read the best passage in the book. And ideally, it'll be exactly 60 seconds. I'm going to quickly share my screen with you to show you how to do this. Um, the book I've got is Black Voices, and I'm going to insert a table. It only has to be 2 columns. In the right column, I actually put the text, and you actually will submit the document. So I'm just going to type anything in here. What I'm typing in is a poem from this book. This poem is by Owen Dodson, and it's called The Reunion. On the left side, I'm typing in the instructions. So there's more of this part of the poem. I'm going to jump down to the middle of the poem. You get the idea. What I need to do though is I need to take this part, and I'm going to actually shrink this down so I don't make the mistake of thinking this is part of my actual script. Here's the script, and here's the instructions for the script. What most people do in a voiceover script is this is in all caps because you have the instructions here on how to read it. It's punctuated properly, but it's in all caps. Does that make sense to everyone? I will post the assignment in course content, so you'll be able to submit the assignment directly through Blackboard. And that's going to be our first assignment due. It's not going to be due for a week, and you'll have a chance to find the book and figure out how to best write your script, practice it before you submit it. The easiest way to submit this, unless you've got a studio at home, is to talk directly into your phone on memos and send me the memo as an MP3. And you can send it a variety of ways. Hopefully you've already established your Google Drive, your OneDrive, your Dropbox, and whatever other methods of sending files. But you should be able to post this one because it's only 60 seconds. You should be able to post this one directly into Blackboard. Yes, you will send both the script and the video or the audio, not video, please. Just the script and the audio. Does that make sense to everyone? If you have other questions, I'll open up a discussion board with the assignment. Mr. Tyson?
Yes, sir. So we have to do it exactly in like the script in the chart you did.
Well, you'll do your way, but yes, it'll be a charted script, a voiceover script.
Oh, but we don't have to exactly do it like what you just did, but we can just type in the script we read, did the voiceover for, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'll put another sample in there. I'll actually, I'll get one of the voiceovers that I did for someone and put the script in there for you. So if there are no more questions, I think we are done for the day. I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment. And then y'all have a good day. Matter of fact, y'all have a good weekend. You're actually going to be reading a segment from a book. question was, you can say anything, and the answer is no. You have to actually read a literary work from someone else. And you get to choose whatever work you want to choose. Any novel, yes. And you're right, it does not have to be in English. It'll be due next Thursday by midnight, yes. A week from now. All right, y'all have a good one. Recording is